What is going on, everyone? My name is Jared, and today, on a very tired Wednesday, we are talking about screens and why the notch was really important to happen and why it's going to stay around for a little while. So a lot of people probably think that the iPhone X was the first really mainstream device to introduce the notch, and they're actually correct. It was the first mainstream device. However, it was not the first device. Actually, the Essential phone, which came out over the summer of 2017, was the first, and all they had was a little tiny U-shape around their front selfie camera. They didn't have no Face ID or facial unlocking feature or anything like that. It was just a little tiny U-shape around the camera. And that was the first really leap into this screen cutout, this notch display sort of feeling that became mainstream when Apple released their iPhone X. And the iPhone X came out and you got this nice black chunk missing in the top, right? And it was very controversial because now you're missing screen real estate, but you're actually gaining some because you get the corners, which can certainly be used for notifications and a lot of other cool stuff. And also, of course, in the case of the iPhone, you have all your facial scanning, your IR emitter, your everything, your flood illuminator, all that stuff that is used to recognize your face is in that cutout and is what gave them the ability to have pretty tiny bezels. And after that, now in the Android world, example right here, the OnePlus 6, you have that notch. And no, it is certainly not as big as this notch, but it's still there. And not that a lot of Android manufacturers are taking use of the notch for Face ID and facial recognition features. More than anything, they're using it to gain screen real estate and to further that screen-to-body ratio, which it seems a lot of manufacturers are harping on now to get that number, to pump it up and get it as close as we can to 100. Now, I say it's important because, I think the grand goal, at least for me, is to have a full-screen phone. 100% screen-to-body ratio, no bezels, just screen, all screen. So when you turn on your phone, if you had the camera on, it looks like you're just looking at the ground, right? And I think a lot of people have seen that in sci-fi films and a lot of different things in this several years in technology and games and things like that. People see these all glass designs or glass phones or holographic phones or all this crazy stuff. And I think that really is the goal. And, the notch is really polarizing right now. It's a hot topic, hot button issue that people either are okay with it or they hate it. There really isn't anyone who I could really say loves it. And if you do love it, let me know. But I really think you're either okay, you accept it, or you don't like it, you don't want it. And some people even go to the extremes of saying, I will never buy a phone with a notch. And I think that's really extreme because I think it's a stepping stone, right? It's a stepping stone to where we want to be. And you do have some designs, like now you have the Oppo Find X with no notch and all your Face ID scanning and your rear camera is lift out with a motorized mechanism, or the Vivo Nex phone, which has just a pop-up selfie camera come out right here. But, then you're adding complexities to a device that, one, is already very complex, but this is a solid state device, meaning there's no moving parts. It makes it less able to be damaged. If you drop it, it's not like a moving mechanism that's going to fall and get broken. It reminds me of a CD drive in your computer where, you're just always supposed to push the button, but people press in on the drive and, things eventually wear out, things eventually break, and everything, even from mechanical keys to the buttons on your mouse to buttons on a controller for a console, they all have a shelf life. They all have a lifespan which is finite. it's not infinite. It's not going to last forever. Eventually, your Cherry MX Brown switches on your keyboard will break. They will go away. They will be depleted. And same thing with any motorized mechanism. So these cameras, at least in the Oppo Find X, in that one, when you swipe up for Face ID, because there is no fingerprint, so right out of Apple's playbook, anytime you swipe up to have the facial recognition scan your face, the whole top comes up, comes down. Granted, it takes a second to do it, but that's moving, and it adds complexities. So in the ever battle for growing screens and screen real estate and this whole, this big, gorgeous front-facing display that everyone really wants, the notch, I think, is needed. And, the Pixel 3 is probably going to have a notch on the XL version. Right now, the G7 does, the OnePlus does, the P20 Pro from Huawei does. A lot of phones in Android camps are hopping on the bandwagon. And some of them have legitimate, justifiable reasons, and some of them are doing it just in the namesake of getting on board. And whether they're getting on board to capitalize trends, or if they're getting on board to hopefully, bump up that next step to get a full screen display, I'm not sure. And I don't think anyone's really going to be sure until the next step actually happens. And everything is in place for that. The in-screen fingerprint sensors have been developed and have been started to get produced and integrated in some models. Vivo, in their phones, do have an in-screen fingerprint reader. It's not as fast as, say, the OnePlus on the back, a hardware sort of fingerprint reader. But it's pretty fast. It's probably as fast as a fingerprint reader from a few years ago. It takes a second, maybe 2 seconds to register. And there's some pretty cool tech that goes with that. And the whole thing eventually with the in-screen fingerprint reader is that you could take a whole front-facing display, essentially put this sensor underneath the OLED display, and you could press anywhere and unlock your phone. And I think that's the goal there. But until that becomes mainstream and cheap to do, and until all these sensors can be placed under glass or somewhere else, you're going to have a spot to put them. Face ID is now the big thing in Apple's camp, and you're going to be damn sure they're going to put it in everything from probably their new MacBooks to their iPads to, of course, the new set of iPhones coming in the fall. And yes, they could probably shrink that notch down. I mean, OnePlus's notch is substantially smaller than the iPhones, but also the OnePlus only has the earpiece and a selfie camera. That's it. It doesn't have any facial scanning stuff going on. So that notch can be really small. And Essential, which I could say the founder of the notch, just had a U-shape, which was so unintrusive at this point that we forget how small it actually was. And now the Essential phone was more of a commercial flop than a success, but it did bring some neat things to the table as far as screen design and style of a phone, which I think some people could take note in. You also have phones like the Xiaomi Mi Mix and that series of phones, which forgoes the notch in terms of a bigger bottom chin and almost no bezel on the top and 2 sides. And people might like that better than having a notch for a few years or a year or however long it takes for these manufacturers to capitalize on these new technologies for more screen real estate. And I think it was Android Authority that did a great article the other day about the battle to get to that 100% mark and where everything has came. Back in the day, 50% was good. I mean, the first iPhone, I believe, I could certainly be wrong, was either a little under 50% or a little over 50% screen to body ratio, meaning, the screen percentage to the rest of the phone was around half. And now you're looking at high 80s to low 90s on a lot of phones. In Samsung's camp, you just have the bezels on the top and sides. I think you're going to see with the Pixel 3, they're still going to try to keep front-facing speakers. So you're going to have a slightly larger bottom, and that notch is going to probably have a front-facing speaker as well as a camera and whatever other sensors it needs. So some bezels are certainly shrinking while others are definitely growing as far as shifting the display up, taking off your bezel at the top, and just growing the one at the bottom. And I don't think that's the answer to it. But I hate seeing people be so hurt about this notch when really there is not a lot that is taking away from your experience. I mean, when I use my OnePlus 6, I can't say that that little bit of space that I don't see or don't use is harming my day-to-day experience. And that's just me. You might really just not like it, and that's totally fine. Then just don't buy it. But it's certainly a stepping stone. I think it was a needed stepping stone to get to this. It's an in-between, right? Instead of having really big bezels for the next couple years, it's like we've had, like the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 8. You know, they all had those same chunky, thick bezels on the top and bottom for their Touch ID and your earpiece and your camera, and all that stuff had to go on the top, had to go on the bottom, and that design hadn't changed. And if you really look back, up until you had phones like the Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus, phones like the Essential, and some phones like the Huawei Mate, the Mate 9 had some pretty chunky bezels, but the Mate 10 are pretty slim, and as well as, you know, the Pixel 2 had the 18:9 aspect ratio, still big bezels, but not nearly as big as iPhone. And you look back at the Pixel 1, just a year prior, having a huge bezel at the top and bottom, and that was okay back then. And some people might still rather have that than a notch, but I don't think it is a reason to be very upset, because I think it's just going to lead into something much greater. I think it's going to lead into the all screen. I think it's going to lead into the very thin, minimal, all you see is maybe a little metal band on the edge or the edge of the glass, or a little bit of black. And it's going to be like the phone's not even there. And that's the day I really look forward to. So no, I'm not necessarily thrilled about the notch, you know, especially in some devices that don't handle it well. When you pinch to zoom in on the iPhone watching YouTube, yeah, you're going to lose some screen real estate because it fills out to both of those, I guess, ears, I would call them, on the display. But some of them don't, and a lot of phones now have the software option to get rid of that completely or to not have the phone fill those spaces. So I feel like that itself is just a easy way to get around this controversial topic, which, you know, I would rather be pushing manufacturers to go more and to keep shrinking that notch till the notch is gone, rather than pushing them so hard to not have a notch that maybe you don't see people try to really push the boundaries rather than actually try to continue growing. And I think a lot of people get mad at that design choice and that style, but instead of that, I would continue to push to get rid of it, but get rid of it as making it smaller, right? Keep shrinking it down. Get the sensors for Face ID even smaller, so that notch keeps getting smaller and smaller, and eventually I'm sure they'll figure out a way to put it right underneath the display, have it see through it to the point where you won't even see any of your sensors. Have that little tiny slice of a earpiece at the top and have everything else hidden. I think that would be super cool. So anyway, that was just my thoughts on the notch, because I keep reading a lot of places everywhere, you know, the HTC U12 Plus, you know, is a no-notch phone of 2018. And I think a lot of people are just using it as a hot topic right now to either be in one camp or the other, when really I think we should be pushing to that third camp of no bezel and no notch. And I think that's where we got to be. I think we got to start embracing the different things, the really cool concepts like the mechanized or motorized features. While they're not certainly as durable as a solid state sort of device, it's different. And that's the type of design and that's the type of ingenuity that we should be pushing big manufacturers, again, like Apple, Samsung, LG, not that they're huge anymore, but all those phones, unless you have a reason to have the notch, you know, a specific dedicated reason, push towards something else. Phones that are in different camps, like the Razer phone, the new Asus ROG phone, I guess Black Shark, you know, the other gaming style phones, you have the bezels there for, you know, the big battery, all different stuff, cooling, things of that nature. And in that sort of device, you're not going for that aesthetic. But these premium flagships, these, you know, sophisticated smartphones and style, keep pushing for that new design. I think the Oppo Find X is super cool. I know I'll probably never see it, but I wish I could, because it's different and it's innovative and it's moving in the right direction, rather than getting so hung up on this tiny cutout that we regress an issue we just got to keep pushing. So those are my thoughts on the notch. If you have something to say about the notch, let me know down below. We'll talk about it. We'll see what everyone's feelings are. Do you like the notch? Do you hate the notch? Are you kind of in the middle like myself, who feel that it's a needed sort of stepping stone piece of the puzzle so that we're not there yet, but we're almost there? Let me know. So anyway, I'm Jared. This has been another quick Wednesday discussion, I guess. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.